This sculpture, the Mustangs at Las Colinas, is the largest equestrian sculpture in the world. This breathtaking arrangement of 9 wild bronze Mustangs was conceived and created by internationally acclaimed sculptor Robert Glen. We hear more of Glen's story and hear about his passion for conservation in this edition of Profiles. Robert, by most standards, you have a fairly artistic life. And even by artistic standards, you have a very unconventional way that you live your life. In the middle of the national park in Tanzania, can you talk a little bit about what home is for you?
Yes, it is, as you say, quite an unconventional sort of home. You know, the way that all came about in the first place is that I always worked in the early days in a studio and spent my study time out in the field. And that was anything up to a month, usually shorter, and then back to work in my studio. And more as you go on, and I realized in the beginning but didn't actually practice it, the further you are away from subject material, the greater the distance of your memory of what you were looking at.
Okay.
I call it a fantasy distance, because when you leave it, and I don't work from photographs, and so when you go back to your studio, you're inclined to try and remember things that you were looking at, and they may not always be correct. And so it's difficult in that case to go out and study again if the place is far away. And so more and more what I've done is made the bush time longer. Well, I've been doing that for many years now, and we've been in Ruaha National Park in southern Tanzania for 15 years in our camp there, Sue and myself, and that is just immersed in what you're trying to work with, living it every day of the week. We don't have radios, TV, music, nothing. We just work and study what's around us, and it's pretty amazing.
That is absolutely fascinating. Of course, you've shared that story with me before, but not necessarily the reason why. And it makes so much sense, because if you're trying to remember the way the light hit the tree, even if the animal's gone, you can, instead of trying to fly back to that place,
that's right,
you can go and look out the window again, or walk back to the spot.
You're immersed in it all the time. And it does make a difference, the direct communication with your subject. Yeah. I've seen many people, in fact the majority of artists, go out on a study trip and take hundreds or more photographs. And so they're looking at animals and birds through a camera, go home, and they use the photographs to do their work, where you can actually see it if you know what you're looking at, because there's that lack of essence of the subject material. And that's, I've never agreed with that.
You and Sue both are very adamant about working from life as opposed to working from pictures. And I don't have the eye that you have, but I can look at your work and you almost have a sense of the movement, if I can just put it in a layman's terms, of the movement of that character that you wouldn't necessarily see if someone worked from a photograph.
Yes, I think, well, it's kind of you to say that, but I think that's what I'm talking about, is the essence of something. Inside of all of us, animal or human or whatever, there is a presence, an essence. And once you understand the anatomy and the structure of a subject, what you have to understand even more is what it is, what's inside it, how it breathes, how it feels, and so on. And so the more one can live with it, it's also a very good excuse to be in the bush and live with animals. It's fantastic.
It seems to me, because I am very much a city girl, I have never even in my many years on Earth been camping. So I'm not necessarily embarrassed to say that. I'm not a camper. I know who I am. Yeah. But it sounds like a hardship, but that's not the way you and Sue experience it at all.
Not at all. It's some people might think that because you can't turn a tap on and you get water, that things like that are a hardship. But you know, it's a part of life, and you have a system during a day or a week where you are doing the things that are necessary. We don't have anyone helping in camp, no staff, so we do everything. Fortunately for me, Sue is the cook. My cooking is absolutely disastrous. But we have a river 9 kilometers away, a stream, which is really almost mountain water. In other words, not lots of animals around it at our point. And we go there every 10 days or so to get water, which we put in buckets, bring back to camp, and that lasts us for that time. During the rainy season, which is at the moment is going on, there's no problem with water, and we get it from the roof of our tents. I should explain that our tents aren't just, everyone thinks you live in these little dome tents that when you go camping. Yeah. You can't live like that when you're permanently in the bush. Ours are on 6-foot platforms, 6 foot off the ground, and they're very big. And so it's like a room that you're living in. Sue has a big tent that she uses for painting in, also on a platform. A kitchen, shower, and all the necessary things. And I have basically the same, except that I work in a big trailer. And so that's, it's not hard. You know, you get used to it. I tend to put my laundry off as long as possible. And it doesn't mean you wear dirty clothes, it means that you have a huge pile of clothes. And at the end of that period when you say, I've got to go and do it, we go down to the river in the car, and we spend a couple of hours doing laundry. So, you know, that's our hardship. Just quickly to add to that, people are always asking, what about wild animals? Is it dangerous and so on? And you know, it's not. Especially if you're in a place for a long time, everybody around you, the lions, the elephants and leopards and buffalo and whatever, they all know that you're not a threat. And because you're not intruding on their actual space and confronting them, there's absolutely no danger at all in it. And we often have things coming right through our camps. I mean, elephants right in camp many times, and lions walking through, and you know they're there, and you don't go and confront them, stay back out of the way, and they just go on about their business. So
you've all sort of marked your territory, so to speak.
Yeah, they know our place, and they know that it's there. It looks a bit strange, but it's not a threat. And so they don't try to get involved, but they'll walk through it.
Wow. That's fascinating to me, because I think it says a lot about what people who live in, and I'm going to quote this, civilized, in the civilized world, how much we've forgotten about how to get along in the natural world.
You know, I think this is one of the things that's wrong, and everyone treats New York or London or Paris or wherever as a civilized world. That's exactly the opposite. That is humanity on its way into a vortex. And as we can see right now, what's going on is part of the system. Whereas I think if you're able to live closer to nature, and even here in the United States, a lot of people do go out into the field and spend time in the field in nature. It keeps your mind in balance as to what we really are.
You're going to turn me into a camper, Robert. But it does. It sounds wonderful. Now, I've got a couple of questions for you in terms of, because you very much sound and live the life of an artist. You sound like someone who's made that connection over a long period of time. So I'm wondering how early in your life you knew that that was going to be it for you, that you were attracted to capturing and creating images and that kind of thing.
I can remember very well at the age of 6 years old, trying to catch birds, but really looking at birds. And I think at that point it may have been, I haven't really thought about it much, but my father used to paint birds on lampshades for my mother, who had a lampshade, very small business making them in Kenya. And I always seem to remember that those birds to me looked quite impressive. They were very small and probably not well painted, but I thought they were. And I think from then on, I can remember being involved. And from the age of 7 onwards, I was involved very much in study of birds and used to skive off school a lot to go to the museum and work with the ornithologist there, skinning birds, and got into a lot of trouble for it, from not only my mother and father, but from the school. But also painting and drawing at that time. And so it led from there.
I want to ask you, because I know from your biography that you were born in Nairobi, Kenya,
That's right.
But you're of Scottish ancestry.
Yeah.
Were your parents also born in Kenya, or?
No, they were married in Kenya. Before the war, and I'm hazy, but I think it was 1936 or 37, my father came to Kenya, liked it very much. My mother then joined him and they got married there. They lived in Glasgow, and they went on in Kenya the whole time. Never went back to Scotland. My father then obviously had to be in the army during the war, but he was involved in the Italian Abyssinian campaign, which was no great fight, because at that point I think they were all giving up anyway. So, but he was involved in that. But they just stayed on, and then my sister and my brother were born there, and myself, and there we were.
And that's what you knew as home.
That is home, yeah. And for the last, let me see, I think 20 years now, I've been living permanently in Tanzania. And that's come about, sadly in a way, because Kenya is a fantastic place. It's got tremendous country and wildlife and so on, but it's very, very highly pressurized now by population, because it's a much smaller landmass than what Tanzania is that's usable by animals or humans. A lot of Kenya is desert or semi-desert, and so the people are confined, and that puts pressure on, not only on other people, but land. And so we found that it wasn't really conducive to the way we work in the bush and try to just be quiet and study what's going on. Sue was brought up in Tanzania, and she remembered going back to Ruaha National Park with her father and mother on safari, and her sister. And so she said one day, why don't we go and look at Ruaha? Well, we've been there 15 years. And
it was a good long look.
A long look, yeah.
Well, it does. It sounds absolutely beautiful. And when you take a look at the work that you do and the work that Sue does, you get the feeling that it's exactly where you guys are supposed to be. So apparently the right decision.
I think so.
You and Sue have been together now 20 years?
For over 20 years.
Yeah. Did you meet in Tanzania?
No, we met in Kenya, and Sue had painted again since a child, and wanted to be a professional artist very early, and came to ask me one day how to go about being a professional artist and how. And I said, do it. Don't, go, what do you want to study? And it was animals and birds. Go, live in the bush. She had no money whatsoever, but she did, and she went and on her own over the years has been in the most phenomenal places by herself for very long periods amongst some quite wild people, and has again led a very interesting life on her own in the build up to where she is now.
Wow. Wow. I didn't know that part of the story.
Yeah.
I think it takes both curiosity, courage, and a sense of adventure to do what you guys do.
I think the adventure comes from the curiosity. I think once you've got the curiosity and the inner feeling to do something, sometimes that can lead you into situations you didn't dream about. Some good, some not so good, but that's a side product of your own enthusiasm to do what you want. Yeah. And so those things really, a lot of the time, can be brushed off. You don't brush them off; they happen. You treat it how you can, and then afterwards you look back on it and you say, wow, you may not have done that had you planned it, but it's just part of life.
Well, and I think that it takes that kind of a philosophy really to make it through life, because things are going to happen. That's just a part of the deal. And if you miss some of those experiences, maybe you wouldn't be the person that you are.
That's exactly right. And I find this generally, again, with society and what's happening to the world, is we're getting away from ourselves and what goes on the ground so much that pretty soon we're all going to be living in boxes of cotton wool, afraid to go out and do things. And if you look at what's happening with medication and so on, everyone's taking drugs to kill this and kill that, instead of allowing bacteria just to be the way they should be in us. We're creating again our own problem and destruction.
I think we forget that there is beneficial bacteria out there that we need to, sort of, work in our bodies and work in our food for health reasons.
Exactly.
So I want to go back, if you don't mind, to your childhood and ask you that proverbial chicken, egg, nature, nurture question. I don't know if you've thought about this any, but I thought about it in thinking about your work. you grew up in Nairobi, Kenya, surrounded by all of these things that you love, the birds, the wildlife, etc.
Yeah.
Do you think that awakened an artist in you, or do you think because you were artistic that you had the spirit of an artist, that you were attracted to those things?
That's a very interesting question, and a hard one to answer, because if I had been brought up in Glasgow, for example, I wonder where I would have gone and what I would have done. And even if I would have been an artist, I may have had that in me, but maybe without knowing it. And I think the fact that I was in Africa and surrounded by these things that I was interested in, it must have been inside me, and that facilitated me to go ahead with it. Otherwise, one might have been looking at documentaries and reading books in Glasgow, let's say, and then one day maybe saying, I want to go and do that, or try that. And it would be a very difficult, longer road, I think, to get to where I've been through.
Yeah, I can absolutely see that.
I think so.
You've got an interesting way of working in terms of living there in the bush, having that experience of interacting in the natural world on a daily basis, and then driving to wherever you have to drive and getting on an airplane and coming over to see people like us who love your work. And you've done that all over the world. You've got people who collect your work, from the folks here in Irving who have been fortunate enough to buy your pieces, to the city of Irving with this sculpture, to Queen Elizabeth.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, it is interesting, I have to say that, and that's probably some of the hurdles that one has to do because of how one lives and want to do, in a way, sometimes frustrating. But for instance, when I finish a piece, and I don't know if DHL will ever listen to this program, but that they would have a fit if they could see how we work. Mostly getting things in, sometimes materials by DHL. Anyway, that's another story. But the town where we do our shopping is very, very small. 250 kilometers from where we live. That's where we get our food and everything. And that's where there's a small DHL office, and I send things from there. So I work in my camp. When something's ready, I take it to DHL. They send it to Italy for me, to the foundry. They begin the first process, which I then go and work on. And to do that, I have to drive 800 kilometers to get on the plane at the capital city of Tanzania, Dar es Salaam. Fly to London, fly to Italy, work on whatever I'm working on. It's usually several things at the same time, and then do the same in reverse. And each time carrying materials one way or the other. But just, I don't know what time we have, but you know, when I bring something in by DHL, and I really hope what I'm saying doesn't change things, but the DHL lady knows who we are, and the national parks people go into town quite often, and everyone knows everyone. So when the DHL lady gets a package, she goes down to the market, which is about half a kilometer away, tells the man in the market who's got a little stall, and his business is selling mainly beans and peanuts, but he does all our supplies for us and gets them ready. He then takes the DHL package and keeps it in the market. And you have to see the market. I mean, it's a very nice, very local, typical African market, very colorful. And he keeps that there until a national parks car, or us, or other transport is going to the park. They take it to the park headquarters. If there's a car coming in our direction, which is a long way from headquarters, about a 4-hour drive in the park,
wow,
they bring it to us in door-to-door delivery. So that's how our DHL works, and it's very successful.
But what a cooperative! This is a cooperative neighborhood here. It's just a very large, area that you have to.
That's right.
That you have to follow.
That's right.
You are specifically known internationally for your bronzes.
Yeah.
The Mustangs here at Las Colinas, the beautiful work that you did in, I think it's San Jose.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
And the thing that, in looking at your work, that I'm always struck by, we talked about this a little bit earlier in the program, is there's just this wonderful sense of movement in these pieces that are frozen in time and space. And I remember you telling me once in an interview that if you showed them still, or if you showed them at the end of whatever the journey is, that's the end of the story.
That's right. That's especially the case with animals killing other animals, which happen all the time. If you, I tried to leave a question there. For instance, if there's a lioness killing an antelope, if you had it actually having grabbed the antelope, and you know when you're looking at the piece that's the end of the story, I think that very quickly becomes boring, or there's a block, because you know what the story is. But if you leave it that you don't know whether that antelope's going to get away or might die, that keeps the story going. And I think you can do that in most things. If you hit the moment of the time that you're trying to make the piece and what it's doing, there's a suspension there which I think works, hopefully.
Spoken like a man who has seen many moments like that.
A lot.
Don't get those in the pictures. You
A lot.
just don't get those in the
Yeah.
pictures. The creation of sculpture, especially large-scale sculpture, like many of the things that you've done, it's very physically demanding work. And you've had a long career of doing that. Does it keep you in shape, Robert?
I think you've got to stay in shape to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, doing the Mustangs here was obviously a very big operation. And, you know, one spends one's life on a ladder, up and down ladders, and you can't look at these things easily without having to walk back a long way to see what's going on. But I found a very interesting and strange thing. You've got an overall frame that you made and you put the clay on, but when you're up on a ladder, you're working on a piece, an area like that. But the funny thing is with that, I found that even though you're working and you can only see that area, in your mind you know how that's working with the rest. And I don't know why that is, because you're not seeing it all in one context until you walk back. But there's a funny feeling that goes on that when you're actually working on that section, let's say a foot by a foot, you know how that's working as you develop it with the rest of it. And I can't answer what the reason is for that, but it does happen.
I have to say, and this is from the perspective of someone who loves art and loves looking at art, but is not artistic. I don't have that skill, that ability level, that you can see it and we can appreciate it. And I'm thinking of having traveled to Rome when I was in college and standing in St. Peter's Square and looking up at those magnificent statues, and then finding out later from my art professor that they are created completely, if you were to look at them straight on, completely out of proportion naturally, so that they will look proportional when they're way up there.
That's right.
I think there's a facility for an artist like you, an artist like Sue, anyone who can envision the thing that create the thing that they're seeing in their head, you know?
Yes, I think so. Again, that thing about the aspect of putting things high or low and changing proportions really is very important. It's not a big percentage, but it does have to be done. And this is the funny thing that happened, and again, that's a very long story, but when we did the Mustangs, I was working in Nairobi, knew Mr. Carpenter very well from before. He bought several of my smaller pieces. And when we began to talk about the Mustangs and what size, I knew zero about what they should be. And so I then decided I had to work out how big they had to be, because he didn't know. So he told me how big the buildings were going to be and how big the space was going to be. This was all prairie in those days when I started. And so what I did is the rearing stallion in the group, I did a cutout, very clever way to enlarge something. I just did a drawing of a rearing stallion, cut it out with a piece of cardboard, and at night put a huge piece of polystyrene sheet up, put the cutout here, and projected the shadow from a spotlight onto the polystyrene and cut it out, the size you want.
Perfect.
So I measured it, it was very easy. So I measured 1.5 times life size, which I thought it might have to be. Mm-hmm. Took it downtown Nairobi, where there was a fairly big space and big buildings. Everyone wondered what I was doing, but I carried this horse in, put it there, walked back, and I thought that's about right. But you know, this was a hick from the sticks, making horses for Las Colinas and sizing and proportions. So everything went along, and it took 7.5 years to do the project. And we spent nearly 2 years in the service center at Las Colinas here, doing the actual layout of the positions and the elevations above sea level for water and all those sort of things. I didn't do that, engineers did. So the time came now when we were going to move the horses into the plaza on their concrete block plinths that they were on. And that was the real day of judgment, because that's when it worked or it didn't work.
And
so
it's done.
Myself and Jackie Knox, who I'd been doing a lot of work with here and who's still here, we walked back into the car park on the other side of the road, a long way from the plaza. And we watched this crane pick up the first horse off the truck and put it, and I was very high up, and they lowered it down, and I was just standing waiting to see how it would work, and it worked. So we both breathed a sigh of relief. Jackie knew exactly what I was thinking, and it worked. So there we are.
And 25 years later now, where we are in this point in time right now, they are a testimony to your work and a testimony to Mr. Carpenter's vision, and more beautiful now, I think, with their aging than they were the first day you put them in here.
Well, you know, I agree, and I would like to see them in another 25 years, but I won't be around. But anyway, it's strange because, you know, with metal, with bronze, it's an alloy, it changes and it goes green eventually. It's mostly copper, it's 85% copper. And so it will go green, and whatever happens in the air around it. But when we first wanted to install them, and they were in the foundry, we hadn't colored them yet. They're colored with acid. I said to Ben Carpenter that I would like to see them how they're going to be in 50 years, because we can do that. And he said, no way. He said, I want them to look like they're new, and they're new in Las Colinas, and let them do what they want after that, which I can understand. Mm-hmm. So that's why we did them the brown color in the beginning. It wasn't long after that when the legs started to go green because of contact with the water. And he phoned me up in Kenya and said, can you come over and have a look at this, because there's something wrong. Uh-huh. So I came over and I said, it's not wrong, but I told you that before, and they will all go that color eventually. Well, we don't like it, what can we do about it? Because the public are saying that these things aren't being looked after, they're not being cleaned. So I said, well, we can balance it more by making them slightly more green all over, which we did. But again, it's something that you can't beat it, you know, it'll just take time.
Yeah, nature does take its course on everything.
Everything, on everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, especially me.
I want to ask you, as we sort of close the show, I have 1,000 other questions, but they just won't fit in this show. You and Sue obviously have a passion for living the way you do and for creating the kind of work that you do, but you also share passion for conservation and have spent several years of the last several creating something pretty wonderful that's going to really be a legacy for you guys, I think.
Well, I don't know about that, but you know, one gets involved in things, and I think we always look at it, if you're gaining from something, you should give something back. And especially in those situations, or in any situation, but where we are in the national park, the park is huge. It's the biggest park in Africa. It's just been made the biggest park in Africa. And around that, there is a wild area that no one lives in, which is hunting reserves. And they are actually a good thing, contrary to what most people think, as a protection thing. Outside that, you've got village people. Now, in many ways, those village people see rich people in their eyes coming into the park every day, and they're not allowed to come in, and they're not allowed to go hunting in there, and they're not allowed to collect honey in there anymore. And so there's a bit of aggression that goes on, aggressive feeling about national parks. We're poor people, here's a national park, why can't we use the land? And so there's a big education process that must go on with the children especially, about appreciating why and what it is. Mm-hmm. And so outside the park, in fact it's about 45 kilometers outside the park gate, there's a village called Idodi, and Sue mainly has been involved on several of the small school boards. She's a director of a couple of the schools. And she is very involved with the Idodi school, and we're trying to promote that to be inclined towards wildlife education in a fairly big way, to get kids enlightened. She organizes that the kids come into the park in school buses, which we hire, and they have a day or a night and 2 days in the park looking at animals. They love it. A lot of those kids have never seen an elephant, and they live right there.
And they live right there.
Yeah. And so slowly they begin to understand it. We show them movies, and the facility that we built at the school to try and help Sue and myself is, we call it an environmental center. It's got an auditorium that'll sit 100 children, a library, which we're still trying to get books for, and it's not easy, but general education books and environmental books. And then it's got a slightly more luxurious place for elders from the area to have meetings and so on. And so anyway, and kids to watch movies. It's gone really well. It's gone very well.
It sounds like a really wonderful way, as you say, to give back to a land that you guys have sort of become one with. I don't want to get too airy-fairy here, but in many ways, if you look at the artwork, you can see that. You can see that that's what you guys
Yeah,
have done.
you know, there's so many things on the peripheries of our artwork and why we live there and how we live there. Other people are involved around us, and we're involved with them just so that we can live. And so you do get involved, no matter how, you can't not get involved in things that go on.